Okay, so let's go to today's talk. Right. Again, okay, so this is a course in medical research. That's my name, that's my designation, that's my email address, and that's my LinkedIn profile. Right. We're moving to module 2. Module 1 was basically introducing you to research, familiarizing you with how research is done, all the different modalities, how it can be done, and the why and how of research. So module 2 is we're going to step it up a little bit. We're going to get more specific with this session. Oh, sorry. Got a screen freeze here.
Sorry, what? Say that again.
I'm sorry, I got a screen freeze. Sorry, guys.
Okay, please.
Okay. Okay. So module 2, as I said, we're just going to step it up a little bit, take you a little bit deeper into research, and we're going to get more focused into your final projects, which is going to be review papers that all of you are going to contribute to and produce. So the main ideas or the themes for today's session is we're going to be learning how to search the global medical library, and we're also going to learn how to do an appraisal of a scientific article. So once you've searched it and you've zeroed in on an article, you would probably zero in on many articles, and how you're going to read them, condense what you've read, and store them for further references and for further citing. Right, so that brings us to the question of where we're going to search for all this material. So we're going to search for the material, all this material, in the biggest library in the world. And can someone tell me which is the biggest library in the world? It is the internet. So the internet is the biggest library in the world. Plethora of information. Again, is the internet a boon or a bane in terms of information? It is both a boon and a bane. Boon because anything you need, any kind of information you need, it's just a few clicks away. And you get multiple sources of information, multiple opinions, whatever. A bane because what happens is a lot of unverified information is put out. There is no restriction or regulation on what can be put out on the internet. So there are a lot of opinions, there are a lot of false information, and all of that comes out into the internet. So it takes an expert eye to filter out what is truly credible and what is not. That comes with practice. So in those times, the internet isn't really useful because you might be misled because of unverified information. Now again, talking about the internet broadly, talking about it broadly as a library, and then talking about what are the different avenues that you have on the internet that can provide you with these resources. There's not just one resource, there are many resources in terms, i.e. search engines and medical libraries in particular. The one particular thing that I think most of us use by default is Google. we all do it in everyday life, inside the hospital, outside the hospital, inside your universities, outside universities. Whenever you come across a medical term or any other term that you're not familiar with, you always Google it and you have something about it, at least a basic sentence about it right there, and you can choose to take it forward from there or not take it forward from there. So that's the big mummy of all search engines is Google. Now, again, coming to searching for medical articles in particular, and this is even more relevant when you get into doing systematic reviews and reviewing literature in general. Google is probably too wide a search engine to give you useful results. I mean, you probably have to go through 100 pages of Google to get as many results as you would get in probably 2 or 3 pages of either PubMed, Embase, or Medline. If you've read scientific articles, if you've read journal articles, if you've read systematic reviews, you'd always see them quote these 3 names. These 3 are the most commonly used medical search engines. I would not really call them search engines, because what they are basically is they're all virtual libraries, primarily representing one particular library, which is the National Library of Medicine, NLM, which is located in the United States. And so they have a huge repository of medical journals, information, articles, and all of that. The other good thing about it, or rather why you quote that, or why this is considered a gold standard, is because all the information there is verified. All the journals that are indexed in any of these are all journals that have been highly verified and hence very trustable. As you go more into the research world, you'll find something, or you'll come across something called predatory journals. Now, these are journals that would publish anything that you write for a certain fee. So it works on a business model where you pay them and they publish it for you. Because of the proliferation of these kind of journals, it becomes very important to have a certain standard in publishing and a certain index which only accepts truly verified journals. And that work is done by National Library of Medicine. PubMed is kind of the umbrella library, or the umbrella virtual repository, which combines both Embase and Medline. Medline, you have a few articles in Medline that are not in Embase and the other way around, but PubMed generally would have articles listed in both. Again, so these are 3 things that you should remember, 3 sites, websites that you should remember, or 3 names that you should remember. And always, you can always go back to these names when you want to search for a particular verified medical article, and you can be rest assured that it is credible. Right. Again, I'm just having a problem with the screen sharing, guys. Sure. Sorry. Screen sharing. Okay. The best among the rest again. There is no best among the rest when you're considering PubMed, Embase, and Medline, but I would say PubMed is more inclusive, more comprehensive. If you ask me to choose one amongst the 3, I would choose PubMed, but you can always use the other 2 as well. Now, time for some fun. Can someone tell me what this is? This is a library in Portugal. What is special about the library? Right, so this is called the Biblioteca Joanina in Portugal. What is special about this library is every night they let in bats, yes, bats, to come into the library and they help in cleaning up the library in terms of eating up all the moths, and this helps preserve all the rare manuscripts in the library. Now, again, when you talk about medical research, another term you come across a lot is the Cochrane database. So what is the Cochrane database? Cochrane database is basically a database. The Cochrane organization is just formed by different experts from all over the world. It's not a physical organization. It's just a group of individuals who've joined to form an organization with the mission of making sure that they provide quality, credible evidence for medical practice, something like NICE, but at a much higher level. So this Cochrane database is basically divided into, it has two main components. One is the Cochrane database of systematic reviews and the Cochrane control register of trials. So this is a repository specially for systematic reviews and registered trials. Now, when you start doing systematic reviews, you would have to register your review with any of the organizations. It can be an organization or a framework called Prospero, not a framework, it's an organization called Prospero, or you can do it with Cochrane. So when you register with either of these, what happens is you again follow a protocol. So Cochrane has a different protocol of doing it, Prospero has a different protocol of doing it. And when you do it by the Cochrane protocol, and when it is approved by the Cochrane committee, then your systematic review would go on into the Cochrane database for systematic reviews, which is quite a high place to go in terms of systematic reviews and medical research. Again, the same goes for randomized controlled trials. So you plan to do a randomized controlled trial, register it with Cochrane, they give you a protocol, you follow the protocol, you do it by the protocol, it's again reviewed, assessed, and if they think it's worthy, then it goes into their registry. Now again, so we've kind of talked about the different search engines and the different databases and how you have to choose a suitable database for what you're researching. Now, what are you going to key into the search box of these websites? So you have something called the mesh terms. So the mesh is medical search, medical subjective headings, medical subject headings. So mesh terms are basically, you can think of them as keywords or kind of specific catalog words is probably another term that I'd use. Like how if you go to a library and the books are cataloged into different sections and you have each catalog is titled, but mesh goes further than that. It includes terms that are not just the titles of these catalogs, but also keywords and terms that are repeated and relevant to what you're searching for. For example, if I have to do a search in, let's say in orthopedics, if I have to do a search in search about the shoulder joint and fractures of the shoulder joint, in let's say fractures of the shoulder joint in cyclists. So my mesh terms would be shoulder joint, cyclist, fractures. So I would start my search with those terms. Again, so if I'm just going to key in shoulder joint, cyclist, and fractures, that is not going to give me a very useful research because it is going to give me, it's going to go and find out everything in the literature that's got these three terms. So it's going to be more wide-based. It's not going to be very useful for me. It's going to take more time to sift through it. That's where you have something called Boolean terms. Now, this is more of a mathematical concept. It's a mathematical operator. It's basically used in logical mathematics. So there are basically three Boolean terms. They are and, or, and not. So again, using the example of shoulder joints, cyclists, and fractures. If I want my search to be very narrow, and if I just want very few articles, and I want my search to be very focused on just the three, I've decided that I'm going to do a review on just the three, and I'm not looking at anything surrounding it, or I'm not looking at any findings surrounding it, or any of the literature surrounding it, like fractures of the forearm or fractures of the arm in general. If I'm not looking at any of that, I'm just fixated on these three terms, then I can use the Boolean term and. The reason I use the Boolean term and is it will give me a very specific result. So I'd say shoulder joint and cyclist and fracture. So what the search engine does is it crawls and finds articles, only the articles which have all the three terms together. Okay. Now, if I were to use the same, for the same term, for the same mesh terms, if I were to use or, it would be cyclists or shoulder joint or fractures. That's going to give me the opposite of using and, which is going to give me all articles that have any of these three. So it can be articles that have only cyclists, articles that have only shoulder joints or only fractures. So I'm looking at pathologies other than fractures in the shoulder joint. I'm looking at injuries other than from cyclists in the shoulder joint, and I'm looking at any other anatomy associated with the shoulder joint, like let's say cyclists fractures, cyclists fracturing their upper arm or their forearm. Okay, so that's the or term. And then if you want to use the not term, it's, let's say, the most common cause of, for example, hypothetically, the most common cause of shoulder joint fractures is due to cycling. But there is also probably a 5% chance that bungee jumpers will also fracture their shoulder joint. But I want to look at that and not the 90% of shoulder joint fractures due to cyclists. So I want to get the cyclist term or the cyclist factor out of my search equation to get me to that 10%, which is going to give me just the 10% of fractures in the shoulder joint due to bungee jumping. So I say fractures and shoulder joint, not cyclists. So that would take out the cyclist term and give me that narrowed in 10% results that I'm looking for. That's the usefulness of the word not, or the Boolean operator not. Again, why do we use mesh terms and why do we use Boolean terms? And if you read systematic reviews, you'd come across a method section where they would quote the mesh terms within inverted quotes, and also they would also mention the Boolean terms that they used. Why is that important? It is something that you have done and you have taken the trouble to search literature. Why should you quote that, or why is that important? Because the credibility of any systematic review, or any review for that matter, is in its repeatability. So a very good systematic review should enable the reader to repeat the same search and should have the same results that you have. So basically, starting from the point of searching literature, if they have to do your whole systematic review again, they should have the same results that you had come up with. And then if they want to analyze the evidence and they want to do a review and all of that, they should be able to do it from there. The review might not be the same, but the search and the search for literature should be the same. That is very important. Okay. So that brings us to the next topic. So now you've got the search engines, you've put in your keywords, you've put in all the Boolean operators, you've got about 756 articles, or journal articles for that matter. It's going to be humanly impossible to go through all the 756, because in reviews, what you have to do is you have to screen the articles, and then you have to decide which ones are eligible, and then you have to apply inclusion and exclusion criteria. So for that, you need to organize your search. It's very important to organize your search. And how do you go about organizing your search? A very archaic method of doing it, which still can be done, is to make a folder on your desktop and put in all the articles, get all the materials, put it in there, sort it out from there. But that's going to take a lot of time. That's the second way to do it. The magic tool to do it is Mendeley. Mendeley is an amazing tool, and I'm not advocating it because I'm paid by Mendeley. I'm sadly not. It is just because of the reason that I use Mendeley and I find it to be extremely useful and extremely user-friendly. You can use EndNote, which is supposed to be equally good. I wouldn't be able to say again, but it's up to you to use whichever. But I've used Mendeley. I'm very happy with Mendeley. So what does Mendeley do? I would recommend all of you to download Mendeley sometime in the week and just go through it, just fidget around it, and then you get a hang of what it is. But basically what it does is it kind of helps you search literature, helps you find literature, all the ones that you found in PubMed. So let's say in PubMed, you get a search page with 10 different articles from a single page with 10 different articles from 10 different journals, 10 completely different journals. A lot of them would be paid journals, which you would not be able to access the full article unless you pay a certain amount of monies. But what it does is when you open that link, and then you have a small plugin called Mendeley Web Importer on your browser. When you open that link, let's say it is analysis of cycling shoulder fractures in France over 10 years from 95 to 2005. That's the article. You have a small abstracted. So once you go into it, what Mendeley would do is it would pull out all the relevant information about who the author is, when it was published, and if possible, if the article is freely available, then it would get a PDF of the article as well. It would get all of that in a sidebar on your web browser. And then what you can do is you can import that into a library. So Mendeley is, again, a standalone desktop application, which has a library. And so this goes into your library. And then you read article 2, it does the same for the article, goes into your library. So you can just populate your library within about 5 minutes with all the 10 articles, which you're going to analyze further down later. Right, now what happens once you go into your library is you go into Mendeley, and then you have that article, you open that article, you have all the relevant information. If you have the PDF, the full form, the full article, you open that, you read it. Now you want to summarize it. You want to make, you've read it, you've got an idea about it, and you just want to jot it down. Just like how you would do it on the side of your textbook, on the side of your notebook, or put a stick-on your notebook. Mendeley has an option where you have a small notes column where you can make notes about it. It also has an annotation column. Now you get to writing your paper. Now you want to make a citation of it, or you want to cite that particular article. Mendeley has an option. It has, again, a plugin for Word, Microsoft Word, where you install the plugin, and what happens is there's this certain way to do it, and then you get that article referenced, cited there, and then you come to the end of the article, you do the references section. Now, again, as you must be aware, you must have seen references are long, boring pieces of text about the author, when it was published, which journal, and all of that, and the different styles to do it. So Mendeley, again, does all of that for you. You just have to, it pulls the information from, you just have to say, once you put all the references into the main text, it's just a one click, and it will populate the whole reference section in the style that you want. Now, this saves a lot of time when you're doing research. And I think it's extremely useful as a tool. That's my strong case for Mendeley, but I recommend you to try out the other apps, EndNote and Mendeley, and it's something that you learn on the go as well. I mean, what I've said is probably 10% of what it can do, with many, many options that you'll probably learn on the go. Again, with research, this is not with the writing part, but this is with the information that you collect. Now you've kind of screened all articles, you've decided on what you want to include, what you want to exclude. So out of 756 articles, you decide to include about 42 articles, right? 42 journal articles, which fit all your inclusion criteria and which you think are really good articles, which you should probably talk about. So what you will have for those 42 articles by default is you will have an abstract, because PubMed will give you that. Now, when you're doing a systematic review, there are many things that you have to do. You have to have a thorough understanding of what the article is, which means that you have to have read the article not once, but at least a couple of times to kind of get that kind of understanding. And you would also need to assess for a risk of bias in the article. Now, I'll talk about risk of bias, how to do the risk of bias for individual articles that you're assessing, and also for your own review, for the review that you're doing, to make sure that you are not biased in any way. There is a certain way to assess that risk of bias. So I'll talk about all of that as we go into the course. But for assessing the bias in that article, you need the whole manuscript. Now, how do you get the manuscripts? This is again a very sticky question, because it again propels me into the area of ownership, authorship. Should scientific information be made available to everyone free of cost? That's a whole different debate by itself. But the crux of it is, if you're attached to a university, you would generally have a system in your university or your hospital or your NHS trust, which gives you access to most of the scientific material. The one that I work in, we have something called Open APINs, which kind of gives me access to a lot of the material, a lot of the published material free of cost because I work here. There's also something called OVID, or you can go into the publishing house's website. Most of the times you can buy individual articles for a certain fee, or you can subscribe to the journal for a certain fee. But the second option is very, very costly if you're doing a systematic review. If you're going to be paying 30 quid for every article, that's not going to be viable or feasible. So I suggest finding out which is the provider gateway for scientific resources in your university or NHS trust and or any organization that you work for, and enrolling yourself to that. That makes life much easier. There are also third-party websites that do provide that provide scientific material free of cost, but I don't know how verifiable they are. And there's always the case that they can be banned anytime. Right, so we come into the section for references. So you've got the abstract, you've gone into your, let's say, Open Athens is a provider gateway. You've gone into Open Athens, I've gotten my full article, I've opened my full article, and then I get Mendeley to do the work. So what Mendeley does at this point, when I get the full article, is Mendeley would tell me about the article, would also tell me all the articles that are referenced in the main article. Supposing there is this article about cycling in France and injuries that I spoke about, that article has about 25 references. Mendeley would give me information about all the 25 references. The titles, and then from the titles you can go into the abstracts. So in systematic reviews, it's always important to go and branch out from the main article, go into the references, see if you find anything useful there, and to find if you can include anything from there into your main review. And this also goes with, even if you're not doing a systematic review, you're just doing a research question, then you start searching and then you come across articles. It's always a good idea to go into these references and see if you can include them. And Mendeley is a good tool to do that. Now, having said that, I think I should caution you about misleading citations. So what happens is, let's again go to the paper on cycling and shoulder injuries from France, because the Tour de France happens over there. They've done a review. They've done probably a study of over 10 years. Now they have quoted, they have a reference that says that they have referenced another article which was done 10 years before them, which said that most of the riders got injured on their right side or fell on the right side and got injured, and then their right shoulders got injured. So that is a reference that they've quoted from a paper 10 years ago, which was again done in the United States, right? So if you want to quote that, you go into that paper, you see that reference, you're excited about it, you think that's a very solid solid evidence for your case, for the case that you're making, or you review, and then you want to quote that, and you just decide to directly quote that reference and quote what they have said, take the gist of it from what they have said in this paper from France, and say that, you know, in the United States, whatever, 10 years ago, the right-sided shoulder injuries were common. But you don't know if that paper from 10 years ago was an original study or if they quoted it from somewhere else. That could have been a paper during the same time that was done somewhere in Australia, and they quoted from that paper. So basically what happens is, if you don't go to the original source, if you don't take the trouble to go and find the original source, i.e. find if the study was done by the authors of that paper and not quoted from somewhere else, it becomes more of a Chinese whisper. So what you end up quoting can be very further away from what the original article quoted, because it's been referenced and cited many times without verifying the original source. So there are examples where it's been completely diametrically opposite information to what was quoted. So the takeaway is that you go to the original article, take the pains to go to it. It's going to be like a set of clues that is going to lead you somewhere. You take the time to go to it, verify it, and then quote the original article. That would make your review even more solid, or more credible, rather. Again, how do you get them? That's what I spoke about in terms of the provider gateway, the scientific gateway, open ATHENS. I think it's a good idea for all of you to go and find out what Cardiff University's scientific resource gateway is. If you want any help with that, then I probably, one of the organizers or me can help you out with that. Again, current contents and citation index. These are two useful resources on the internet where they will give you current contents. Is just basically a table of contents of all the relevant new material that's being published, new topics that are being published. And citation index, again, citations of all the material that's been recently published. I encourage you to look into both of these. Right, now we come to, we've done all the hard lifting, we've collected the evidence, we've collected the PDFs, we've gotten all of them on our Mendeley library. It looks great. We've got about 46 articles, or 42 articles, did I say? Yeah, 42 articles with all the original PDFs, original material. Now, what remains to be done is you'll have to do the reading of all the articles. Again, so it's very tempting to, I mean, I've done it many, many times. So you pick up a journal or you pick up an article, you start reading from the title, do the abstract, then get an idea what all of it is about, do the introduction, 3 paragraphs into the introduction, it's terribly boring, but you still kind of soldier on, do the methods, even more boring, do the results, can't get worse, and then coffee break time, you're done with it, and that article is forgotten. You're not going to come back and read. That's a problem with linear reading. We always assume that articles are meant to be read the way they're written. No. I will come to how it should be done, or I wouldn't say how it should be done, how it is best done. But again, whatever floats your boat. So this is a method that is tried and tested, and a lot of people are comfortable with it. And it is sustainable. So, but again, experiment and do whatever works for you best. Again, skimming and choosing. Now, this is not, again, to do just with systematic reviews. This is more to do with if you're given a whole journal on a topic that you're interested in. Let's say you're interested in cardiology, you're given a cardiology, recent advances in cardiology journal. It's always a good idea to just browse through the whole journal in terms of look at the titles, look at the authors, look at when it was published, because that is very relevant with medical research. It's always the ones that are published later that have more credibility because evidence changes. It's very important to, again, go in and look when the study was done, when it was sent to the journal, and when it was accepted. If you take a journal like Nature, which is, let's take the Lancet, you'd have articles that were sent in way before they were published. So it's very common to have a 6-month or a 1-year gap before when it was done and when it was published. It's important to understand that difference and look at both those timelines before you're going into reading. And always, and as you start reading more on a particular topic, you'd find a lot of repeated names, and these are research groups that have established themselves for research and have been doing a lot of research work, and they would be putting out papers on a regular basis. The more research they do, the more credibility their research unit gets, and hence you would be probably tempted to read more of their work. So it's important to understand when it was published, when the study was done, and who the authors were. So that's with the authorship, timelines, and relevance. Again, coming to the preferred order. So what's the best way to read an article? So the best way is probably to read the title, see if it interests you, read who the author, find out who the authors are, find out when it was published, when the study was done, and then read the abstract. Find out if you find it any more interesting than the title. And then after you read the abstract, you go into the results section. It's very counterintuitive, but you do that. You go into the results section and you look at the tables. Now, when you start doing it this way, it's going to seem very hard and very abstract, because those tables are just going to be jumbles of numbers that are not going to really mean anything. But the more you do it, and the more you get accustomed with biostatistics and what the different numbers and the p-values and all of that are, which we would be doing later in the course, those tables would make so much more sense to you. And when you read those tables, you would understand what data they were looking at and how weighty their data is. And once you do that, once you look at the tables and the charts and the graphs or whatever they have, all the pictorial representations, then you go into the results. So once you've done the tables and the graphs and the pictorial representations, you would have a mental write-up literally about the results. You'd have your own interpretation of the results from the tables and the diagrams there. And then you see if that is what is quoted in the results. And if you see that if there's any more information, or if there's something completely different, or if there's a new finding in the results. For example, if I'm looking at a table, I'm generally looking at the highest, the lowest, or the most significant finding in terms of the highest or the lowest finding, and I'm looking for a pattern. I'm looking for a declining pattern or an inclining pattern. So these are the three things that I'm looking at. So when I read the results, there would be information on this. Plus, there would also be information on something that they found interesting. It could be something completely off the hook, but something that came up during the research. That would be very interesting to read. So you should do that as well. So read the results, and after you've done both, then you go into the discussion. Now, discussion is a very broad area where they kind of, it's almost an internal dialogue by the author, where they kind of assess their work, they look at their work critically, they find out what the strengths of the research were, they find out if they've really answered the research question that they set out to answer. They also tell you what were the other interesting things that they found out. And they also tell you what the limitations of their work is. And then they explore and they look at it with relevance to other similar studies that have been done. They tell you if this is in line with all that has been told before, or if it is completely opposite to what has been told, which makes it even more interesting. And they tell you also what the future scope of this work is. So it's very interesting to read the discussion after you've done the results. After you've done both of it, now you know what exactly the paper is about. You have an idea, you have your own interpretation of it, you know the crux of it. And then you go into the methods, and then you're curious to know how they did it, and then you go into the methods. And then you have the methods. It's just very hard and fast data about how it was done, blah, blah, blah. Use this, Boolean operators, the mesh terms, and all of that. And then you go into the introduction, which is, introduction is just an icing on the cake, where contrary to the word, but when you're reading an article, it becomes the last thing that you're reading. You again reassess the background of it, what they set out to answer, and what the consensus on that is. So this is a very good way to read it. What I would like for all of you to do is to pick up any random article of your choice and any random journal in the topic of your choice, and try to read it this way. Do not go for very complicated articles. I'll probably try to send a very simple article for all of you to read. And if all of you can read it in this order and let me know your thoughts on it after reading it this way, that would be really useful to know, and we can take it from there. We can make modifications. It's a work in progress, but we can take it from there. All right. So that's the order to read it. So what's the mental framework? It's very important to have a mental framework when you sit to read something again. Otherwise, you get lost in the whole process. So it's a mental framework to do it. Again, so you kind of understand the background in the question. Ideally, this is done from the introduction, but you kind of get a whiff of it from the abstract. The abstract also serves as a kind of introduction. It's got a very brief introduction in itself. So that gives you an idea about the background of the question. And then you see, you critically look at the findings. So these are all, I'd rather say that these are tick boxes that you have in your head, or gaps that you have in your head, or buckets that you have in your head that you want to fill in after you read a paper. You should know what the findings were, and you should know what the supporting evidence was and how strong it was. You should also know what the factors in the study were that have altered the findings, or that could alter the findings. Things that have not mentioned, that they have not mentioned, which could alter it. Like if they've analyzed data from a very large group containing people from 18 years to, let's say, 100 years, and you think that if they've included people less than 18 years, that could kind of variate the data, then you should probably consider that as well. Again, repeatability. The more repeatable a study is, or if a study is very easily repeatable, then it is a very well done study. Again, as I mentioned before, any interesting incidental findings, always keep your antennas out for these kind of incidental findings, because these can spur ideas on your side and help you come up with research questions. Again, so that's all with the reading. Now the last bit, where you've read, you've analyzed it, you've kind of done the mental tick boxes, checklist, but you need to put it down to paper, and it's important to write a summary of whatever you read for future purposes, to know what your thought process was at that point in time, and to come back to it and refer. Or in case of systematic reviews, you need to have a summary. It's very important to have a summary, because that's the information you're going to condense, juice out, and state in your paper. So there is a certain format to summarizing and critiquing as well. So I'll come to critiquing at the last, but we'll start with summarizing. So the most essential component of summarizing, I think, is to have a very thorough reading, not once, but at least twice, probably 3 or 4 times. And you would be really surprised at how much sense it makes when you read it for the second time, and how much more sense it makes when you read it for the third time, or how different a concept or an idea seems to you when you read it repeatedly for the good. Again, I would advise you not to look at the article once you start drafting the summary, because it can lead to something called unintentional plagiarism. Because what can happen is you would start quoting or verbatim what is said in the article, and that will lead to plagiarism. At the same time, you should not plagiarize, but you should make sure that the facts and details remain correct. So there are some hard facts that have to be stated as they are in terms of numbers, place, and all those things that have to be kept the way they are. Again, you have to draw a rough framework, and within these parameters, you have to write your summary. Again, your summary is not your opinion. So it's very important to understand the difference between an interpretation and an opinion. How do I put it? So let's take a movie. So a movie like, let's say, Matrix, okay? Or let's say any sci-fi movie, okay? Your, like Interstellar, right? So Interstellar, your interpretation of Interstellar is probably, most probably, what the director wanted you to interpret and understand. That's why he's gone ahead to make the movie, make such a fabulous and grand movie. It could be slightly different, but it could not be, it would not be very further away from what was intended to be interpreted. That is interpretation. Your understanding, your interpretation stems from your understanding, right? Again, your view or opinion can be completely different from what the movie's director wants you to think. Again, the movie's director is not going to influence your opinion. He's only going to influence your interpretation. But your opinion is just the person you are, the circumstances that you're in, your thought process, and your view of it, your perspective of it. So that's the basic difference between an interpretation and a view or an opinion. So in summarizing, it's important to understand that you are not required to state your opinion, or you should not state your opinion or view, but you should be very objective and just state your interpretation and make sure you follow that framework. Again, you should also state what the further scope of that paper is. If there's a question unanswered, you should come to that and state the further scope. Again, so critical appraisal is probably something that stems from summarizing in the first place. So you're trying to be devil's advocate here and look at the paper and find out what could be wrong. You're just trying to be harsh on the paper for its own good. And so you're looking at contradictions within the paper. You read through the paper, you find any glaring contradictions, you state them. You look at the adequacy of data. If the data was really powerful enough, or the data was sufficient enough to state their findings or to prove their findings. A very important thing here is when you're doing the study design, it's important to calculate the power of the study or the sample size. Those are things in biostatistics, which I will come to in a bit in future courses, future talks. But it's important to understand that you have to be able to estimate, again, numerically, if the data was adequate, if the sample size was adequate, and if the study was powerful enough. A lot of times, what authors tend to make is they tend to make overarching generalizations. They tend to throw them in when they have gaps to fill, or when they cannot answer certain questions, or when they think that data is not adequate. You'd see a lot of generalizations. So you need to be able to pick out those generalizations. And if there are any unanswered questions, most of the times authors would state at the end of the study that these are the questions that they have not been able to answer in spite of doing this research or the study. And that's fine if they state it, but sometimes they would not and try to kind of bury it under the carpet. But you should be able to pick that out as well. And you should include all these in your critical appraisal. These are two different documents. A summary is a document that you mandatorily write. Critical appraisal, you can choose to write or not, it's up to you, but it's a good idea to practice it. All right, so we come to the fun part of it. I've basically designed just 2 questions as a part of a very fun quiz. These are hardly technical questions, but I think they would test at some level your ability to apply what we've gone through in the last hour. Any Harry Potter fans in the house? Yeah. So Harry Potter decides to forsake wizardry and take up medicine later in life. Quite unlikely, in my opinion, but he does that. In the course of medical school, he and gang are asked to write up a case report on a curious case of a person. This person is a muggle who presented to the clinic with 4 heads. Even in the magic world, this seems to be a rather uncommon occurrence. So a muggle presenting it with it is even more uncommon. He decides to search the literature and finds many, many articles. How should he ideally go about reading an article? You have 4 options here. So Sri has very kindly agreed to create a poll. I would like you to answer these questions in this poll, please. All right, so I think almost everybody's chosen 3. Is that right, Sri?
I think they're just still voting. 11 of them have voted
Okay.
so far out of 18.
Okay.
Yep, I think I'll end the poll there. Most of them have chosen 3.
Okay, so in case you're wondering, 3 is the right answer. So the right way to do it, as I said, is read the abstract, find out when it was published, because relevance is very important in terms of the time frame. Then you jump to the results, and then you jump again to the discussion. A lot of jumping around, but that's fine. And finally, settle for the introduction and methods in the beginning of the article. All right, we've got another Harry Potter quiz coming. Yes, this is to do with the Boolean operators again. So this person has 4 heads and 7 legs. It's grown 7 legs since the last question. Now, what kind of mesh and Boolean operators do you think he should use? I agree with, yeah, have all of them.
6 of them so far have voted.
Okay.
Yep, I'll end it there. 15 people have voted, and most of them are for number 2.
Okay. So number 2 first, number 1, 4, and 3. Okay. So let me just talk you through. That's fine. So the ideal way to do it would be to use all the 4 because it's a very uncommon occurrence. So when you're talking about uncommon occurrence, there's going to be probably 1 or 2 other people, for example, who are going to have 4 heads and 7 legs. So you want to make sure you include them as well because he's doing his research on that. And it's muggles he's talking about because wizards can grow them. So he needs to ensure that all the articles have all the 3 mesh operators to find how many muggles had both 4 heads and 7 legs together. Okay, so that's the reason 2 is the right answer for that question. Okay, so there ends our quiz. That's a picture of the big repository that we've been talking about. We've all been talking about in the virtual world. We've all seen PubMed on our browsers. But this is how PubMed looks in brick and mortar. This is the National Library of Medicine. It is in Bethesda in Washington, state of Maryland, United States. If any of you are planning a trip to the United States, it would be a good idea to go and have a look and send us some pictures as well. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think we're done.
Thank you very much for the session.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for patiently listening to me. Thank you, organizers.
Perfect. See you all on Saturday at 11 a.m. again. Yeah.
All right.
Shrinji, I think two people, I just checked my email. Two people emailed me regarding was Utah, I think he's there, and Shannon is also there. It's good. Did you reply to that?
Yeah, I replied to them. I'll add them to the group.
Okay. We need to get their preferred topics.
I'll send them the form as well.
Yeah, that would be great, and then we can add them to our mailing list as well. So yeah, Nash, 2 more people have joined our session. So that would be 26 in total.
Okay, so what I will do is I'll send the feedback forms and also send a simple research article just to practice reading. I'll try to do that tonight, and then we can take it from there.
I'll sign it for tomorrow morning first thing then.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the session.
All right.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, guys. I'll see you again on Saturday.
We'll try to get the proposals to you as soon as possible.
No problem.
We're starting to create the groups and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Movin and Nish, myself and Srinjay are the ones leading the 4 teams.
Sure.
So then you can act as like a coordinator and a supervisor.
Yeah, no problem.
Wonderful. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
See you guys. No problem. Have a good evening. All.
Take care.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.